Test. 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 Are you hearing anything? Test. John, are you?
I've got it in here, Mark. It sounds good.
We don't have any volume in the room, no.
Just check your mute levels and audio levels on the iPad.
Test. 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 Hello? Oh, yeah, and I'm getting it now.
Yeah, so I am really excited that Pastor Cindy, when I told her that my friend Ed was coming into town, I said, I was trying to think of a good congregation to plant him in. And of course, I immediately thought of Emmanuel because you have a mission heart. And there are many of you who have your hands and feet into the St. Paul Area Synod connections, Bega Qua Bega, and all and other spots. And so I just know that that's a part of your ministry here. And so I just want to introduce Ed. You had a little taste this morning during his sermon, but Ed comes to you from Norway. My connection with him is that my husband served the American Lutheran Church in Oslo from 2015 to 2019, and Ed happened to come one Sunday and do a presentation on Stefanus Alliance, and so we got connected through that, and we have remained in touch. So I'm just going to turn it over to Ed to do a little deeper dive into the conversation that he set for us this morning during worship.
Thanks, Emily. Am I coming through here, or did I turn it off? Not yet. All right, let me... No, that's fine. How about that? Someone can look at my kit here, because I... He's working on it.
Spicy, yes.
Because then we got...
There you go.
That's the easiest then. Yes. Ah, there we are. We got sound. That's wonderful. Good. All right. So okay, I'm getting to an age now where I didn't grow up with technology, so it's not as fluid for me, so I tend to rely on just basic things. So I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. Is this the whiteboard? Oh yeah, okay, because I was just lecturing at St. Olaf's, and the room I was in, all the walls were whiteboard walls. That was great. I scribbled on all of them. It was really nice. So, but I have one up here. All right. So time again. What do I have here?
You have until 11:45. If you go to noon, the Ethiopian church will start at 11:30.
Okay, sounds good. So as I mentioned, Stefanus Alliance is a missions and human rights organization. Okay, and those two things sometimes, you don't hear them in the same sentence very often. So I'm part of my background is in education. I've been a teacher. And I know that if I stand here and lecture for 45 minutes, you're at some point going to get bored, and some of you are going to nod off, and that's fine. If you need to nod off, you can nod off. Just don't snore. That's. But if you are actually active yourselves, you'll learn more. You'll remember more. So I'm going to jump right into it. I want you to now, in small groups, you can break yourselves down into groups of 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever you decide. And I want you to come up with all the thoughts, ideas, terms, phrases that you connect with the word mission. And then halfway through, I'll say, okay, now move on to human rights. Okay? And if you have something to write on, it'd be easier because we're going to reflect on it afterwards. So the task is split in two. I'll give you one time period split in two. First task, what ideas, thoughts, anything that comes to mind when you hear the term mission or missions? And then halfway through, what comes to mind when you hear the word human rights? Some might have more experience than others with that, but we want all voices here. Okay, anyone have any questions about the assignment? Okay, then if you break into sort of small groups, sort of just turn around where you are, and you have 6 minutes and 27 seconds, okay? Okay. It's working again, so perfect. All right, if you wouldn't mind sort of bringing things back together, that would be great. That was amazing there with the soccer player just moving it around. That was great. Right. Okay, so I feel that the room is a little bit sort of lopsided, but I'm trying to move back and forth to both sides. So even though we're in a minority here, I'm trying to also be on the side. So any thoughts? Just let's start with the group in the back. Any thoughts on the word mission?
Okay, from the notes, which is some words that we had was outreach, for mission and outreach,
Yeah.
purpose,
Yep.
helping.
Helping. Okay, let's stop there. We've got to give the other groups a chance as well. So this group back there then.
We agreed on the outreach part.
Okay.
Missions is kind of a church word.
Churchy. Okay. Churchy. Yeah. Okay. One more.
Global, I think, is another.
Okay. This group up here.
And travel, we tend to go somewhere else for.
So travel. Yep.
What are other good ones? Just pick. Objective, that's sort of in the.
So purposey sort of sense, objective. So can I leave it purpose plus? Okay.
We also thought about colonialism.
Oh, okay. So the negative side of it. Okay. Yeah. Great. Over here, this group up front here.
We had sending home.
Sending. So global traveling.
We had faith
Faith. Okay. Put us next to the churchy bit.
and forgiveness and understanding.
Okay. Forgiveness and understanding. Okay. And the last group, let's see, was a group in between, right? There were three groups on this side, and a group in the middle here.
I think a lot of the same, we had financial support.
Okay. So part of the sending entails that we actually provide support for the people. So financial.
We also had, injustices and misguided activities, sort of like the colonialism.
Okay. So that the missionaries have been involved in sort of some negative activities. Yeah.
But giving learning, service, proselytizing, sharing faith.
Sharing faith. So outreach, sharing. And what would you said something just before that? What was that?
Proselytizing,
Okay, proselytizing, sharing. Yeah.
evangelizing.
Okay. Great. So sharing the faith. Great. All right. I don't know if you can read that. I don't know if I can read it myself either, but that is an attempt. Outreach, a couple of people said that, purpose or objective, sharing, proselytizing. Something with forgiveness and understanding, but maybe on a negative side, colonialism, churchy, so it has to do with something with faith. And there's sort of a global aspect to it as well. And then something about helping. Before we jump onto the human rights side, I don't know if any of you have read he's at, I don't know what university he's at now, but I don't remember his name off the top of my head, but he wrote an article for the most prestigious political science journal in the U.S. And I remember he came to Norway and he shared his findings. And he said originally they wouldn't accept it because his what he wanted to test was of the countries today that are further along on the scale of democracy, good governance. Okay, democracy is not in or out; it's sort of a scale of a number of things. How much rule of law do you have? How much accountability do you have? Good governance structures, a number of factors. And those countries that are further along on the scale, what happened 150 years ago, 200 years ago? What things happened in those countries that could be predictive or corollary to this? and he tested a ton of different things. And the one thing he found out that sort of stuck in the throat of this journal, so he had to resubmit it like 4 or 5 times and really fill out his methodology. They said, fine, okay, we can't disagree with it. We don't like what it says, but we can't disagree with it. And his major, strongest correlation was those countries that today have a higher level of democracy, good governance, rule of law, are those countries that had Protestant conversionary missionary activity in them. And that's exactly what people said. Why is that? Because this comes to mind very quickly, and certainly those countries that had missionaries that were often missionaries connected strongly to the state had a political objective in addition. Whereas those that were sent just by a sending organization didn't have that same political connection. And certainly there was colonialism, certainly there's imperialism, certainly there is we are better than them attitudes. But what he found, he says, he's very careful, and he said that I have no findings whatsoever that indicate that the conversions in and of themselves have led to this. So it may be clear about it. I'm looking at it from a sociological, political science perspective. But what we do see is that missionaries that were concerned about the souls of the individuals did a number of things. Number one, people groups that had no language, they produced a language for them. And so missionaries have been responsible for maintaining more cultures than they've damaged, because without a written language, most cultures get absorbed into the majority culture at some point. They lose themselves. But with a written language, you can maintain it in a completely different way than if you only have an oral language. Are you with me? So they created languages for them. You had linguists who came, and then they need to teach people to read. So suddenly you have literacy programs, which means you should actually have schools, which means you have to have teachers, and not just teachers coming in, but local teachers. So we train local people to teach their own people. So you have a whole plethora of things that happen around it. And if children are dying of dysentery before the age of 5, we need to have health services. So we need to have hospitals. We need to have trained nurses and doctors, and that whole area rises up. And then as we see the evils of society, for instance, sati. Are any familiar with the Hindu sort of term sati? It was the Brahmin caste, the upper caste. If the husband in the family died, it was expected that the widow would throw herself on his funeral pyre. And if she didn't, she was an outcast, and her only livelihood would be prostitution or begging or something. And so Christian missionaries said this is an evil thing, and they created civil society groups that didn't exist before. And then, interesting enough, this particular thing in India caused other caste groups and Brahmins themselves to create their own civil society groups. So you see the picture as a cascading effect of wanting to win souls. You create all these social structures, which we know then political scientists now indicate that those societies today that function best for all people, that thrive, are those that have 2 key factors: a strong government and a strong civil society that can balance out one another. So Francis Fukuyama is one who's written about this extensively. So we've created a civil society that can stand up against these dictatorships. Okay, anyway, this is a little side note. But okay, let's get over to the human rights side. Start with this middle group first. You guys had to go last.
Social justice.
Yeah.
Freedom of speech.
Okay.
And can you repeat those?
Yes, thank you. Very good. Thank you. So social justice, freedom of speech.
Freedom of religion.
Okay, freedom of religion. Yep. Then let's see, this group was the one next to the last.
We had people doing the right thing,
Do the right thing. Okay.
kindness and respect, and acceptance, and equality.
Equality. Yep. Great. And then I think we went to this group over here. compassion, so we'll put that with kindness. Okay.
Disagreement.
Okay.
People disagree on
Yeah.
human rights.
Yep.
And then we had a lot of sort of antonyms, I guess. Abuses, persecution.
For disagreement. So the anti sort of
Yeah.
human rights, sort of, so the negatives, yeah. Okay, so abuses. It's easier often to see the abuses than to see the positive things. Yeah. Great. This group back here.
Access to shelter, water, food, just basic needs. Everyone should have that space to be
Okay.
safe.
Basic
as
needs.
well.
Yep. Great. Okay. And the first or last group. The first shall be last and the last shall be first.
Well, once we have been said, safety,
Okay.
freedom,
Yep. Good. Okay. The political philosopher John Rawls, some of you might be familiar with, posited the original state. And so often I'll use this when I'm lecturing or teaching on human rights, whether it's in the jungles of Myanmar or at universities. Sometimes I do this experiment, and we don't have time to do it, but it's an interesting thought experiment. Imagine that tomorrow, this evening, the world would be wiped clean, in a sense that when you wake up tomorrow morning, you will be reborn, and you don't know what station in life you will be reborn into. You don't know if you'll be a man or a woman or transgender. You don't know if you'll be in the upper echelons or the most impoverished drug addict. You have no idea where you will end up. You with me? So just imagine all possible outcomes where you could be in society. So your task before you end up there is to create a world with rules and structures that you think would be the best for society. You with me? Because it's one thing to say, as a billionaire, I think we should have these kind of rules. Or, if you're at the bottom, what kind of rules would you like to see? But if you don't know where you are along the scale, it makes a completely different way of thinking about it. You have to really accommodate and think, really what Jesus said, treat others the way you would like to be treated. So, when I'm out and about, and I'm speaking in churches, or I'm meeting with my human rights friends, I often meet two separate challenges to us as a missions and human rights organization. My really ultra missions friends, the ones who are all about sending and evangelism and those sort of things, they talk about, what is it in English? What is it? Something the soul. What does it benefit the soul if you gain the whole world? And what is it if you gain the whole world but lose your soul? Right? So we need to get people in the kingdom of heaven. So this human rights stuff, this is all about wishy-washy, women's rights and all that kind of stuff. We don't really want to do with that. We want to win souls. And I say, well, the Bible seems to start with all human beings are created in God's image. And I ask my friend, do you believe that? I mean, you believe the Bible? Well, yes, of course. Well, then that means that's how we should treat people. As people. As human beings. That's the basis of human rights. So when I'm lecturing on human rights in a secular setting, we talk about the values, why we have human rights. And it starts, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights starts with recognizing the inherent human dignity. Human dignity. Everyone has dignity. Infinite worth. As a Christian, I can say, where does that dignity come from? What is the source of that? They don't deal with that. In fact, there was a big discussion, should they have that part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? And given the Soviet Union's place at the time, that was not even, it was discarded. But we as Christians can say, because God created us a special way. So that's human rights. And then my human rights friends, they focus on this colonialism part of missions. And again, I don't deny, there were bad things that happened in the name of God, in the name of Christ, as people were sent out. I don't deny that. But just as I mentioned in my sermon, I've come to the place where I believe the world is less either or, black and white, and much more both and. It is this, and it is also democracy coming, civil society building. And we don't have to just focus on the one and not the other, and we don't have to be blind to the one and the other. I can stand up and say, yes, Christians have done horrible things in the name of God, and they've done glorious and wonderful things in the name of God. So when I talk to my human rights friends who say, yeah, but mission, that's all about converting people and often tricking them or forcing them, and that's what mission is all about. And I have to say, okay, listen, every 4 years, we just had it just recently, when I walk down the main street in Oslo, Karl Johan Street, there are a bunch of booths. They were just there just a few months ago. And people dressed in different colors. They're standing at their own booth and the next booth, and they're bribing me. Okay, they're offering me pens and water bottles and candies to talk with them, and they're trying to persuade me that if I were like them, the world would be a much better place. If I would just convert to their political ideology, the world would be a better place. And in Norway, we have multiple parties. We don't just have two. So that's why there's so many booths. There are about 8 large parties that typically are in the parliament, but there are probably 10 other smaller ones that are trying to break through. So they're there trying to convince me that it's what they believe that's the one thing that would make the world a better place. And I say to my human rights friends, should we stop that? I mean, they're bribing me. No, that's freedom of speech. That's freedom to participate in the political structures of life. And I said, when I talk about mission, that's what I'm talking about. As a missions organization, we don't send missionaries. We never have. We work through local churches. And those local churches, some of them may be evangelistic. They may want to share the gospel with the idea that people will change their beliefs. But we have a strict guidelines. They are not, anyone that we support will not use force. They will not use coercion, and they will certainly not use enticements, offerings of schooling or food or other things to people who are in a vulnerable situation. It has to be very clear that those are gifts, those are things we give out of the goodness of our hearts because we love, and no expectations that people should convert. Now we know that people do from that love being shown to them, but there should be no expectations whatsoever. We give freely, and people are free to choose. And my human rights friends, I say, oh, if that's what it's about, then we're okay. So in Norway, we've been able to bridge a gap. So I walk into churches, and I speak about human rights. And I walk into human rights fields, and I talk about the missions kind of work that we do. I should have stopped. If there are any questions underway, please feel free. Just raise your hand, and I'll probably finish my train of thought. But feel free to ask me questions. So for our mission is to help the church that's under persecution. We exist because about 70 to 75% of the world's population today live in countries with high or very high levels of restrictions on their religious freedom. And we feel called to do something about that. So the church exists almost everywhere on earth. We don't send people and tell them they should be doing church in a particular way. So we work, when I say the church, we work with, hallelujah, Pentecostals in some places. And we work with the Coptic church, who have the church Desert Fathers, if any of you are familiar with that term. I mean, these were ascetics who lived in the desert. Some of them, one guy, he lived on a pole for 30 years, sat up on a pole, and people gave him food just to meditate with God. So there are not many of them doing that now. There are monks that I meet. So the spectrum from Pentecostals to the Coptic to various Orthodox churches to the Roman Catholics to the Eastern Rites Catholics and all variations of Protestants, it's the church that we support. And if they want to send evangelists, so we help them with motorcycles in Vietnam to get up to villages so they can share their faith, that's what they want, okay. But if it's the Chin people in Myanmar who are 95% Christian, they say, we are the most underdeveloped state in Myanmar. Right now there's a war going on, a civil war, which makes it even more difficult. But before that, they said the government they haven't provided anything for our state. Neighboring states all have airports, they have hospitals, and they have universities. We have none of those. Zero. We're the only state that doesn't have them. And it's primarily because we're a Christian state. We have Bible schools. So we've trained pastors. But we don't have business people. Our young people, if they want an education other than being a pastor, they have to leave our state and they never come back. And we're losing all of our young people. Can you help us create a university degree in business administration? Okay, if that's what it means to be church there, salt and light, that's what we'll do. We'll help the church do that. So our mission is to help the church in their context. We listen first. We don't come and tell them what it means to be church. And we certainly don't tell them what sort of liturgy they should be using. Whether it's a high liturgical or low liturgical, and whether they should do this much water or this much water. That's not our job to do that. We have recognized that if maybe some deep theological questions haven't been answered in 2,000 years definitively one way or another, maybe we're not the right organization to come and tell them what the right answer is. And especially when I meet my brothers and sisters in the Middle East who have had a Christian tradition for 2,000 years. And as a Protestant coming there, a much younger tradition, telling them how they should do church is a little bit arrogant on my part, I think. So that's the mission side. On the human rights side, as I said, we defend the rights of everybody, regardless of who they are. So an atheist blogger in Nigeria who's been accused of blasphemy and apostasy and is sitting on death row, we will stand up for their right. We will defend it. We will write about it. We will meet with Ministry of Foreign Affairs officials. We will meet with officials in the Nigerian government so that person can be freed. That's part of our work. If the Rohingya Muslim community in Myanmar, in Burma, is being forced out, being attacked, their villages are being destroyed, we will stand up and say this is not right. They have a right to be who they are. So the distinction might be that we can help strengthen the faith life of the Christian church. That's not our job to strengthen the faith life of Muslims or Buddhists or anyone, but it's our duty to stand up for them, to be who they are. Does that make sense? Questions or comments about that so far?
Where is your organization based? Is it based in Norway?
Yes. So we were founded in 1967. Original name was Mission Behind the Iron Curtain. In fact, it was in the church that Emily's husband was the pastor of that it sort of had its birthplace. I was speaking there one day, and this little old lady, I was describing our work, she sort of raised her hand, and I thought I speak in churches where people raise their hands a lot, but not in this Lutheran church. So I looked at the pastor, and he said, "Sir," and so she stood up and said, "Hi, my name is Jillian Holby, and I was here when Richard Wurmbrandt, so a Romanian Jewish convert to Christianity who became a pastor and sat in prison for more than 13 years because of his faith, because he would not preach the way the communists told him he should preach. He was bought free by Norwegians. He came to Norway and he spoke in, among others, that church. And he challenged Jill to start an organization. She said, "I can't, but I can introduce you to someone who can." And introduced Richard Wurmbrandt to a laywoman, a prominent laywoman in Oslo, and a bishop up in the north. So a liberal bishop in the north, a conservative woman in the south. And that's been our organization from the beginning. We're not a liberal, we're not a conservative, we're a middle of the ground, moderate organizations. We work with both. We hope we can. I realize that sometimes people on either side think we're too much like the other side and we're not going to be able to cooperate, but that's okay. We want to occupy the middle ground. We want to have conversations with people on both sides. Yeah.
Sounds like something I just want to confirm. Is it the case that if a country is repressive of religion, it tends to be repressive of all rights, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, etc.? Or is there a democracy that allows all the other freedoms, but is repressive of just religion, for example?
Yeah, good question. So, whenever we're dealing, especially in social sciences, there's very seldom a single directional causality line. We can look at correlations. We like to say that religious freedom is not the most important human right, but it's certainly not the least important. It's just as important as all other human rights. Those of us who work in the field of human rights say they all interact with one another. And by sort of oppressing one right, you're oppressing the other rights. They go together. So yes, where religious freedom is under pressure, women's rights are under pressure, children's rights are under pressure, freedom of expression, freedom of association, the right to life is under pressure, the right to not be a slave, the right to not be tortured. All those rights are often, they go hand in hand. What comes first? There's no clear one or the other. There seems to be a trend that governments that want to oppress their people will go after civil society organizations that could be a voice against them. And religious communities tend to be a prominent voice. So there's often a move towards silencing religious communities before they go after some of the other rights. In those countries that have had a robust independent press, they'll go after those quickly as well. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. And so we've recognized that rights intersect. And so we have, I don't have them with me because I've given them all out, but if you're interested, hopefully I'll be coming back to the area. I often lecture or teach on human rights, basic introduction to human rights and basic introduction to religious freedom. Because for many people, religious freedom often means benefits or privileges for my community. But what it means is freedom for everyone. It's a level playing field for everyone. And that is difficult for those who live within a majority community. And I hope I'm not offending anyone, but I've worked in this field for 20 plus years, and I've seen rising religious nationalisms around the world. So India is, for me, the prime example. For more than 100 years, you've seen an idea that's called Hindutva, okay? And that means that India is for Hindus. If you're not a Hindu, you can't be a good citizen of India. And that means Christians and Muslims are often attacked. So I could have brought up the story, I talked about Pastor Joseph. In 2023, more than 500 churches were destroyed, burned down in Manipur state, in one state in India. There are regularly attacks on mosques and churches, Christians and Muslims. And again, it's the idea that they're not good citizens, they're enemies. I've seen the same thing with Buddhist nationalism in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, Christian nationalism in Russia, a very virulent force that it's not just Christian nationalism, but it's Orthodox Christian nationalism. So other Christian faiths that aren't of the Russian Orthodox faith will be oppressed. And unfortunately, I'm seeing trends like that in the United States that frighten me, where we equate being a good citizen with being belonging to one particular form of Christianity. This is not a good path to go down. Yeah, there and then there.
Couple questions. What did you teach? Second, how many of you are there like you? How big is your organization?
Yeah.
Then how many scary countries have you been in? Because it sounds like you really a scary job.
Yes, I'll repeat the question. Thank you. Good. So, teaching, you asked me a very quick question what I taught. And then how many are there like me? And then there was one other one. What is that again? The third? How many scary countries? Scary countries. That depends. Scary. So I taught. I had a teaching credential, California teaching credential, to teach elementary K through 9th grade, any subject. And then I also could teach high school in psychology and physical education. Yeah. We are a small organization. We are 27 or 28 staff members. Again, all based in Oslo. We don't send missionaries. We travel we're visiting with our local partners. We've just registered ourselves in the United States. Bless you. So we don't have an office in the United States, but one of the things I'm doing right now is trying to see, is there room for an organization like ours? Would people like to support the work that we're doing? I'd like to think there is a group of people that would like a Christian organization that doesn't just stand up for the rights of Christians, but does stand up for the rights of Christians, if you catch my drift. We do both. Scary countries, this depends. I mean, just to be honest, the most scary thing I do is get in a car. And, that's the scariest thing I do here in the United States. And in some countries where traffic laws are not adhered to, running red lights happens all the time. People do that. They drive the wrong way on major roads, freeways. The cars aren't well maintained, so that, I've been praying in a car, driving it late at night, and we're driving 60 miles an hour down a freeway, and suddenly, whoa, where'd that car come from? There were no headlights, and it's coming 60 miles an hour on our side of the freeway, on the shoulder. So that's the most dangerous thing I do. But I do travel to places that most people don't. So when I was in North Korea, and Kim Jong-un first came to power, and I came into the hotel, and my guide, I didn't ask for a guide, but I'm given a guide, is standing right behind me. The TV is on, and there's a general thundering on about something, and I asked him, what did he say? And he says, he's saying, "Oh, good citizens of the paradise on earth, North Korea, the imperialists and their lackey dogs, so the United States and South Korea are on our border, ready to attack us. Be prepared, everyone will be called into military service because we're going to war." Now, officially the war in the Korean War is not ended. We have an armistice. So officially it's still there, but I mean it's no violence. But he's just declared war, and I have a US passport. So I was a little bit concerned. And there have been some other times when I was a little bit concerned. But overall, it's fine. If you want more, I can tell you more later. Okay. So there was a question here as well.
How do you parse out the difference between freedom of religion and human rights? Because there's some religions where women, their rights are being oppressed. And then how do you parse out the differences between strong cultural beliefs and religious beliefs?
Great. Okay, let me grab those two. If you have more, we'll do that after, but let me grab those because those are two large questions. So the first one, freedom of religion or belief and other human rights, like women's rights, for instance. That was the first question. The second question was distinguishing culture from religion. Okay. Like I said, rights intersect. Within, and this might be a little too technical, for those of you who want to sort of turn off, please feel free to. In the plethora of human rights, we have a number of conventions that sort of tell us what the norms are. And countries are free to sign and ratify. It's a two-step process, those conventions. When they do that, those countries say that we will, when they sign it, they will then work towards their country's laws and constitution being in line with the covenant. And then they ratify. So once they're in line, they can make reservations, a few reservations, and some countries do, to some articles. So the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights has Article 18, which regulates religious freedom. Okay, and there are 3 paragraphs. And the third paragraph, 4 paragraphs. The third paragraph is the limitations clause. Okay, all human rights are immutable, but there can be, under certain circumstances, you can limit the practice of those rights. So someone who commits a crime can lose their right to freedom of movement. For a while, they can be put into prison because they've done something that causes them to justify it. They can't remove it, well, they could remove it forever, but there are limitations. This clause says there are some key things that have to be in place. And this is where we often meet religious leaders who say that our religion says we can do X, Y, or Z, and it's our right to do that. And I meet with women's groups. In fact, we have a whole booklet, and again, I've given them all away, so if you're interested, where we look at the intersection between women's rights and religious freedom. And where do they intersect in ways that can be in conflict, but how do they intersect in ways where they can strengthen one another? And this is very important. So religious leaders will say FGM, female genital mutilation. That's part of our religion or tradition or culture, and that touches on the second question. I'll get back to that. And therefore, we have a right to do that. And women's rights groups say, no, you do not. And often women's rights will say, that's why we shouldn't have religious freedom, because people are using that to abuse. And I would say, well, let's take a step back. Within religious freedom itself, that third clause says, activity that you do that is against the law, and there can be good laws and bad laws, and is necessary to protect one of 4 or 5 different things: public health, public safety, public morals, public safety. Are you with me? And you can't achieve the same goal in any other way. It's legitimate for the state to limit it. So under religious freedom itself, practicing FGM is allowed to limit. In fact, it's a duty of the state to limit it because it harms young girls. So we don't have to appeal to something other. We can appeal right to the right itself. It is not an absolute right. Well, it's broken into 2 parts. There's an internal part, which is absolute. The state has no right to interfere with that. But the activities we do, the state could interfere with. That's why during a pandemic, the state can legitimately say there are public health issues when we bring people together. So we should be limited in how we do that. Now, another question would arise is, how is the state practicing that? Does it allow some religious communities to meet and not others? Then it's being discriminatory, and it can't do that. Is it barring only religious communities, but you can go to a football match or some other cultural event? Then it's being discriminatory. So there are legitimate grounds to limit the rights of people when they harm others. You with me? And the same in freedom of speech says the exact same thing, exact same text, except instead of public safety, it says national security. It doesn't say that for religious freedom. So you can't, even though some countries do arrest people for religious or national security issues, that's not legitimate under religious freedom, but it is for religious or freedom of speech. The second part, having to do with culture and religion. When I lecture on religious freedom, I often start out by asking, what is religion? And again, we don't have time to go through it in detail, but we are used to, in our part of the world, religion being one thing: faith, belief, orthodoxy. Okay? But for many people in the world, and here in the United States, what you believe isn't as important as what you do. Practice. And that can be informed both by your dogma, but it can be informed by other things that are coming in. So on the surface, you might say, but that's not part of our belief. But they would say, yeah, but it's part of our group. So for instance, I told you about the Coptic church and Bishop Thomas, my friend. When he first took over his diocese, he found that the Christians were practicing female genital mutilation. And he said, well, it's just an interesting story, let me tell you. So he told all the priests in his diocese, preach that, make it clear to people, this is not part of our doctrine. It's not in the Bible. It's not part of our Coptic tradition. No, this shouldn't happen. But it kept on. So then he went, and if you've been to Egypt and you've seen bishops, they are rock stars, literally. I mean, they walk into their congregation, people will bow down, they'll kiss his hand. It's like they're honored. So he went to each church and preached, and it still continued. And people just said it's part of our culture. It's sitting deep. They couldn't refer to anything in the faith, but they said it was there. So his solution was an interesting solution, which points to how human rights are interlinked with other things. He then did some investigation, and he found out that it was 6 older women who were actually doing the surgeries. And he went and met with them, and he said, why are you doing this? This is wrong. This is not part of our faith. He said, well, we know that, but we're widows. We don't have any source of income. So again, speaking of women's rights, there's nobody to take care of them. He said, okay, if I promise you, he didn't have the money, but if I promise you to pay your salaries for the rest of your lives, will you stop? Yes. It ended overnight. So what looked like it could be a faith issue and a practice or a tradition issue was an economic issue. And so sometimes we get caught up in one or the other, and it's a mixture of both, or it has a third issue that we're not even thinking about. And then the last aspect of what religion is that I think is the most determinant when it comes to violent conflict between groups is religion as identity. So I've met tons of Christians, Muslims, others who don't know their faith. They've never read the Bible, read very little in it, or the Quran or whatever. They don't know. They practice it sort of. They go to church or the mosque or the temple at festivals and things, but they're not there. But they are that. If you were to ask them, are you something? No, I am Christian. I am a Muslim. And a quick story about that. A friend of mine, Zia Merrill, who has produced, if you're interested, it's a very interesting book. He's Turk. He's from Turkey originally, a young guy, and he studied theology in the Philippines, and then went on, very, very smart, studied at Cambridge, got his doctorate degree in political science. And the book is called How Violence Shapes Religion. So not how religion shapes violence, but how violence, a culture of violence, then gets transposed onto the religion, and we legitimize the violence we're doing, but it's the violence that comes first. And we've seen that in the radicalization. It's not a radicalization of Muslims. It's youth that have been radicalized and violent, who then look for some sort of justification and find Islam, a form of Islam. Because most Muslims are peaceful people. They're not violent. They're just like me and you. They want to take care of their families. Zia, he converted to Christianity when he was a high schooler. He was a Muslim, nominal Muslim, converted, and his father, who was a prominent military officer, called him in and said, "Listen, Zia, why are you doing this? How could you betray?" And he said, "Not our religion, but our country." So there's an equation between, if you're a Turk, you're a Muslim. If you're anything else, you can't be a good Turk. And so conversion then becomes a form of betrayal to the community, not so much at this level, but at that level. And so keeping in mind, all three dimensions of religion are in play with all of us. Most of us have a combination of them, but some have more weight on one or the other. Yeah.
Just to quickly mention, we lived for a year in Northern Ireland, and this played out there. I think we never once heard Protestants and Catholics argue about dogma.
No.
They argued about access to housing, access to jobs.
Exactly.
Whether there would be a mixed marriage between the Protestant and them, but there was never an argument about doctrines, dogma, and about faith.
Thank you, exactly. So he was just saying in Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants, they didn't talk about articles of the faith, but they talked about access to natural resources or access to public goods. And this is what we see in many parts of the world, especially as the climate starts to change and access to natural resources becomes scarce. We're going to see more and more of this playing out. So this is one of the things we work on, is how do we build peaceful coexistence, cohesion with different religious communities, so when access becomes more scarce, they're not shooting at each other. Yeah.
How do you see this taking place in the United States right now?
I'm seeing this playing out a lot.
Yeah.
And it's been couched in terms of this.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying it's not, but this often comes first. It's not, we don't think of it this way, but this is what comes first. A friend of mine, a Muslim woman her parents are Afghani and Pakistani, and we're running out of time, so I need to wrap this up so we can hear.
People will leave if they don't want to hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, all right, fair enough. So please feel free to leave. But before you do, let me just say, if you're interested, here's our annual report. You can find out more about our work. And then here is, let me just pass this around if you want to grab one. Here's a QR code. You can find out about some of our work with the Christian and Hindu girls who are being married off or are being kidnapped and forcibly married into Hindu or in Muslim communities. So how is it playing out here? This frightens me greatly, where we think we're talking this when really what we're talking. And I was talking about Dia Khan, my friend. She, Pakistani, Afghani, Muslim woman, became a pop star, literally a pop star in Norway, but was facing criticism from conservative Muslims and often from the Christian culture as well, who were questioning whether she was really as popular as she was. So she got threats and she left Norway, went to England, and became a filmmaker. And you can actually, if you want to look it up, I would highly recommend it. She's a fabulous woman. Dia Khan. Had a great conversation with her a couple of years ago in Washington, D.C. She's based there, Washington, D.C. And she had just done a documentary on white nationalists in the United States. And she went into and interviewed a number of these white nationalist groups. And she and I were talking, and I asked her, what do you think the motivation is for many of these people? And she said, you know what? She thought about it. The initial reaction is that it's hate, that it's hatred that drives these people. She said, I don't think so. I think what drives them forward is initially love. Love of their own people, and their feeling that their people are under threat. And the liberal side doesn't get it, because all they see is the hate, and no one's willing to bridge the gap. Because we don't want to talk with them, and they don't want to talk with us. She said, and in the interview, she's sitting in the home of some of these ultra-white supremacist groups. She's dark-skinned, dark-haired Muslim woman, and interviewing them. And at one point, she asked this leader of the one group, she asked him, okay, so what should be done with these Muslims in the United States? And he says, we should just kick them out of here. We should get rid of all of them. And she said, so Muslim people like me points at herself, should be kicked out, and he stops. And now she spent months following, talking with her, just building a relationship, not criticizing him, just asking questions, trying to find out. And he stops and he says, not you. And she says, that was a turning point for him. He contacted her several months later and said, I'm out of that group. I'm no longer part of it. One thing that I would recommend, and this wasn't part of what I was going to be talking about, but I do this in other places where there are high tensions. How do we rehumanize? Dehumanization mechanisms are taking place everywhere. That we talk internally about those others, and we can use horrible terms about them. Fascists, dictators, we talk about them as insects, as violent, we just use terms that in our context creates an image of somebody who's not human. And we're all guilty of it, both on the right and on the left. We don't like to think of it in terms of our side doing it, because they are wrong on the other side. But that's what they're doing too. And who's willing to bridge that gap and suspend and say, I really hate what you're involved in and the way you look at it, but I'm going to reach out to you as a brother or sister, and I'm going to try to get to know you. And there are groups like Better Angels of Our Nature, which are created here in the United States, where they have to be, any new group that started anywhere has to have Republicans and Democrats together, where they will sit down and have meals together and just discuss common challenges. Because as long as we're in our own enclaves, and again, I see it in worlds where it's Sunni, Shia, Yazidis, Muslims, or Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, they're separated by that. Here it's more along a political line, which becomes a religious line because it starts here and not there. Who's willing to bridge that gap? And the dangers it is. It's tough. Those are the things we're doing around the world. If you're interested, please get on board. Take a look at that. And we want to do more good stuff. The pond we're fishing in Norway is tiny. We're 5.5 million people. I like to think that some Christians here in Norway or in the United States also have a vision for stuff outside. I know it's hard. Because so much things are happening here. But if the body of Christ is a global body, maybe we have to be able to do both. 5 minutes too. I'm happy to sit here forever, but but thank you. Sending out a newsletter. So if you're interested, on the QR code that you can register, if you register yourself, you'll get into our system and you'll start getting take a look here. As I mentioned in the sermon, how can we do anything if we don't know? So take a look at our annual report. This will sort of highlight some of the work that we're doing, and I can get more sense. So they're here. Get more information. At some point, we'll introduce our advocacy letters, where we write letters on behalf of people who are in prison. All you have to do is either get a real letter and sign it, or you can get a text message, click yes, and a letter will be produced and sent out. So those are ways in which